Mr. President, last week, Senator Toomey, my dear friend from Pennsylvania, and I introduced a very important piece of bipartisan legislation with our colleagues, Senator Kirk and Senator Schumer. It's called the Public Safety and Second Amendment Rights Protection Act because that's exactly what it does. It protects the safety of the public and our constitutional right to bear arms. Since we introduced the bill, there's been a lot of misinformation about our legislation, and today I want to set the record straight with hard facts about our proposal and what it will do and what it will not do. I think people need to understand how guns first get their life, through a commercial sale of some sort. And what we're talking about is not creating any new laws. We're creating about uniforming the laws we have. First of all, we have on the books today FFL, a federal firearms licensed dealer. There's approximately 55,000 throughout the United States of America. So we all have one close to us or in our neighborhood. These are friends of mine, people I know. If you go to a licensed dealer today and purchase a gun, you're required to do a background check, a criminal background check, and you're basically checked to see if you are able to have a gun. That licensed dealer puts that record of the background check they did, and he or she only, as a licensed dealer, can keep it. It's against the law to form some type of a registry, so the paranoia that people says, well, someone's going to know where my guns are and they'll come and take them from me. That can't happen. In our bill, we even double down to make sure that doesn't happen by creating it a felony with a 15-year imprisonment. So all that myth is gone. The second way that you buy a gun is at a gun show. If you go to a gun show today, and that same dealer, the FFL dealer, a licensed dealer, if you went to their store, you would go through the background check. If you go to the gun show and you buy from the dealer there, you still go through the background check under current law. But if you go to the next table over, you can buy whatever you want and nothing's done. Nobody's checked. And that's what we're going to stop. Today, if you buy it through the internet sales, if you buy a gun on internet and I want to buy it from Senator Toomey in Pennsylvania, and I'm in West Virginia, and I see he has a gun for sale, and I want to buy that. The law today, for me to buy interstate from West Virginia to Pennsylvania, Mr. Toomey would have to send that firearm to a licensed dealer in West Virginia, and I have to go have a background check done before I can take possession of that. So we're not creating new law. All we're saying is if you go to a gun show, there will be a background check for all guns that are sold at the gun show. If you buy it on the internet, there'll be a background check, whether it's in-state or out-of-state. This is not a universal background check, Mr. President. This is basically a criminal and a mental background check. A criminal and a mental background check. And that criminal and mental background check is you have to have been found guilty by a court. That you're a criminal or you're found mentally insane by a court, that you should not be able to buy a gun. That's all. So what everybody's been hearing in all this talk is just falsehood. If you're a law-abiding gun owner like myself, if you're a proud gun owner and like shooting and you like to go hunting and out in the woods with your friends and your family, we do not infringe any way, shape, or form on individual transfer. So if it's not a commercial transaction, individual, someone said, I heard that, well, wait a minute, you know, in West Virginia, usually your father or grandfather or uncle or somebody got you your first gun. And it goes through that. I had some people who have a collection of guns that was handed down by their family, never bought a gun. You're still able to have that type of transaction. That's not interfered with. You can sell to your neighbor without any interference. You can put a note on your bulletin board in your church and say, I have a gun I like to sell, and sell to a church member. No intervention. So if anyone says we're infringing on somebody's rights, we haven't. Because in the bill that we've all worked on, it was a bill that basically we looked at the gun culture in America, who we are, how we become who we are. And that's what we took in consideration. And I, for one, as a gun owner and a person who enjoys hunting and shooting and all the things and camaraderie that brings, I feel very sometimes looked upon in an objectionable way just because I enjoy that. I'm a law-abiding citizen, and my Second Amendment rights gives me that right, and I want to make sure that's protected. But I also have a responsibility, and that's what I want to make sure. And that responsibility is to do the right thing, and that's why we're here. If you're looking for ways to keep our citizens safe from mass violence, then shouldn't we look at the culture of mass violence? The culture of mass violence. I've gone around the schools in West Virginia and talked to some of the students. We can talk to our young pages here, the bright and the best of what we have, and they've probably become desensitized to what you and I would have been in our generation if we'd have seen on television or in a movie, and God forbid, we never had internet back then, so we didn't have that to compare to. And I'm saying, if you're going to talk about banning somebody's weapon, a gun, a hand-me-down, if you will, don't you think you ought to have people with expertise that can tell you what the gun does? Rather than it might just look fancy, but it doesn't perform any more than a deer rifle. So we have this Commission on Mass Violence as part of this bill. And basically, we're going to have people that have gun expertise, people that have mental violence or mental illness expertise. I've gone to the schools and talked to teachers in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and they're saying, wait a minute. We have no help. We identify kids that we know have challenges mentally, or they come from a home that's unstable and are not getting the support. We have nothing that we can do to help them. As a society, we have a responsibility, I believe. So we're going to have that commission with guns expertise, mental illness expertise. How about school safety expertise? We have a situation, the horrific situation at Newtown. That gentleman got in that school not because he had a key or because the door was unlocked. He got in that school because he was able to shoot the glass out of the front door and stick his arm in and hit the safety bar and let himself in. I've been a governor for 6 years of the state of West Virginia. We built a lot of schools and we remodeled a lot of schools. Not one time, Mr. President, not one time did an architect come to me and says, Governor, if we're going to build these schools, they've told me about all the safety devices so you couldn't get into the school. They told me about all of the lockdown in each room, so you had to have a safety code to get into a room. Not one time was I ever told, we should have bulletproof glass on every first floor window. Not one time was it ever brought up to me. So we need people that have school safety expertise. Video violence. Talk to the children. Talk to the youth of today. If you haven't got on the internet lately and flipped to video violence, you should do it. It'll amaze you. It'll absolutely scare you of what you're seeing. The horrific things that you all have been exposed to, which I can never imagine in my childhood. So don't you think we ought to have the people that are defenders of the First Amendment come and talk to us about how we can change the culture of violence in our society? That's really what we're talking about. So I have a lot of my colleagues I've been hearing on different talk shows about saying they didn't like this or we should be doing this. And my good friend, Senator Pat Toomey, and I are going to go through this bill and explain to you what it does, what it doesn't do, and how we can move the ball forward by keeping society safe, treating law-abiding gun owners with the respect that they should have, and making sure that criminals or the mentally insane that have been found to be so by court cannot buy a gun. So, if you're a law-abiding gun owner, you're going to like this bill, Mr. President. If you are a believer in the Second Amendment right of Americans to bear arms, you're going to like this bill, Mr. President. If you're a defender of the rights of our military veterans, you're definitely going to like this bill, Mr. President. If you are looking for ways to keep our citizens safe from mass violence, especially our precious children, you're going to like this bill, Mr. President. But, Mr. President, if you know somebody that's a criminal, or if they've been declared mentally insane by the courts, they're not going to like this bill, Mr. President. And that's exactly what we have tried to do. I want to go through so many of this, but I want my friend, Senator Pat Toomey, and I appreciate him so much. We have sister states, West Virginia and Pennsylvania, especially Western Pennsylvania. Me and my family grew up in Farmington and Fairmont and northern West Virginia, which is an hour and a half below, but we have the same slangs. We say yuns instead of you all or you, little nuances like that. So Pat and I understand each other, but at this time I would like for Senator Toomey, if he would, explains the part that is so near and dear to him and me also. Senator Toomey.
Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by actually taking a moment to inform the members of this body and people who may be listening. If you weren't aware, it appears that a tragedy has struck at the Boston Marathon, and bombs have gone off, and there are injuries that we know of, casualties, the severity of which we do not yet know. We hope and pray that there are no fatalities. Apparently, according to the news reports I've seen, it's too soon to know that with certainty. So I know my good friend from West Virginia joins me in having our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims and their families of very, very disturbing news that we've just learned this afternoon. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the Senator from West Virginia. The work that we've done together has been challenging and constructive, and I think we've come to a very sensible legislative product, something that I can be proud of. I want to thank Senator Kirk for the work that he did in this from way back, and Senator Schumer's contribution to this process as well. I'd like to start, if I could, with just some thoughts about the Second Amendment and what it means to me and why I think a proper understanding of this is so important in this discussion. Sometimes it's useful to go to the source, and so just as a reminder, not that we're not familiar with it, I'm just going to read from my pocket version of the Constitution, the Second Amendment to the Constitution, which simply says, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Now, today we often think that the Second Amendment is about sportsmen, it's about hunting. That's an important part of it, but the Second Amendment is actually much more profound than a protection for hunters. It's more fundamental to our country and who we are as a people. In my view, the framers recognized in writing the Second Amendment, they were recognizing our natural rights, our natural law rights of self-defense and self-preservation. And in fact, those rights precede the Constitution. They were acknowledging and recognizing those rights in the Constitution. They didn't create them. I would also suggest that the Second Amendment is about sovereignty. Who's sovereign in this country? Is it the government? Is it the head of state? Or is it the people? And I think, as we know, this whole great experiment of ours that is America is an exercise in recognizing the sovereignty of the individual people. And a sovereign people, of course, it flows logically, ought to have the right to bear arms, to protect themselves. And ultimately, our founders intended the Second Amendment to be the means by which we would maintain our liberty and prevent tyranny. We often take for granted in a democratic society in which we get to select our own government and our constitutionally protected rights are respected. But we all know that around the world and in the recent past, there have been appalling cases where tyranny has destroyed the rights of relatively free peoples who in many ways have come from societies not terribly dissimilar to ours. So these are some of the thoughts that occur to me when I think about the Second Amendment, why it's so important to me. I see it as a very important part of our very identity as a nation and as a people. That's why it's very important to me personally. In addition to being a gun owner and someone who's always respected these rights, it has a very important philosophical underpinning for me. For years, of course, we had many contentious debates, and one of the contentious debates we had about the Second Amendment for many, many years was probably arose from the first phrase about the well-regulated militia. And the debate centered around whether or not this right, this Second Amendment right that obviously is enshrined in the Constitution, whether that was a collective right that depended on one's membership in a militia, or if it were an individual right belonging to individual people. Now, it was always clear to me this is an individual right. Clear to me for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the founders never recognized the idea of collective rights. For them, it was all about individual rights. But fortunately, our judicial system put an end to that question when a conservative majority of U.S. Supreme Court justices reached the Heller decision in D.C., Washington, the District of Columbia versus Heller. They made it very clear, this is not a collective right. This is not contingent upon membership in a militia. The Second Amendment is an individual right that applies to individual Americans, and I wholeheartedly agree. Not too long after that, in the McDonnell et al. Versus City of Chicago decision, the court went even further, in a way, in upholding the Heller decision and referencing that. It affirmed that decision, but it went further and said that this Second Amendment right is so important and it's so fundamental and it's so basic and it's so important that it's binding on states and local governments as well. So not only can the federal government not infringe upon Second Amendment rights, but neither can a state or local government. So that's a pretty impressive conclusion that our court has come to in resolving a big part of this contentious debate. Now, I would pose a question that the court has also addressed, and that is this a right that's enjoyed by all of the people of America? In my opinion, and I think this is not controversial, the answer to that question is no. Young children are not expected to be afforded the same Second Amendment rights as adults. Criminals who've been convicted of crimes have foregone many of their rights, including Second Amendment rights, by virtue of their conviction of serious crimes. And dangerously mentally ill people are people that we as a society have every right to protect ourselves from, and so they don't have the same Second Amendment rights that everyone else has. Now, I would argue to our founders this was a given. After all, this was a time when capital punishment was quite common, and they fully accepted capital punishment. How perverse and absurd would the idea be that someone who was subject to capital punishment would somehow be able to enjoy his Second Amendment rights? Of course not. It's obvious. Criminals forego that right. The Heller decision is a recent Supreme Court. The recent Supreme Court decision I just referred to addresses this as well. Justice Scalia observed, and I quote, "Nothing in our opinion," that's the Heller opinion affirming the individual right of the Second Amendment, he says, "Nothing in our opinion should be taken to cast doubt on long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws imposing conditions and qualifications on the commercial sale of arms." It seems to me that is a very explicit explanation that it is not an infringement on Second Amendment rights to attempt to keep firearms out of the hands of criminals, mentally ill people. So if the founders are in agreement on this, and the Supreme Court is in agreement, and we have laws in all 50 states that make it illegal for certain criminals and mentally ill people to have firearms, the question is, are we willing to take modest measures to try to achieve this goal that I think we all share and that is clearly consistent with our Constitution? That's what Senator Manchin and Senator Kirk and I are trying to do here today. What we're trying to do is make it a little bit more difficult for the people who aren't supposed to have firearms in the first place to obtain them. And I think Senator Manchin will agree with me that there's no panacea here. There's no law that anyone could write, certainly not this one, that's ever going to guarantee that a determined criminal won't be able to obtain a weapon one way or another. or that maybe even a mentally ill person may not be able to obtain a weapon eventually if they're sufficiently determined. But can't we take a very modest step to make it more difficult? If we can do it in a way that does not infringe on the Second Amendment rights of the law-abiding citizens that whose rights we want to defend. So our bill, I think of it as doing three broad things, and Senator Manchin and I will get to, we'll walk through some of the specifics of how we achieve this, but I would suggest one way to think about it is three categories. One is we simply encourage greater compliance with the background check system we have in place now. We're not inventing a new one. We're not inventing new criteria for it. But the fact is, the participation in the background check system by the various states, you see, we rely on the states to provide information about the people who have been adjudicated as mentally dangerous, people who have been adjudicated as criminals and they've been convicted. Federal government doesn't have that information. We rely on the states to provide it, and what we do in this bill is we create greater incentives for the states to in fact participate in this, because the participation varies dramatically. A second thing we do is we expand background checks to gun sales at gun shows and over the internet. Again, this isn't a new system. We're just applying this background check to a category that has not been subject to it, but it's the existing system. And then the third thing, and we'll talk about this at a little length, I hope, is we have a number of measures in this bill that, frankly, I think are overdue, and they enhance the opportunity for law-abiding citizens to simply exercise the Second Amendment rights that they ought to be able to recognize. So I think Senator Manchin put this very, very well. If you are a law-abiding citizen who enjoys exercising the Second Amendment right, you're going to like this bill. It's going to enhance your ability to exercise those rights that you have. If you're a criminal and you'd like to get a weapon illegally, you probably aren't going to like this bill. It's going to make it a little harder for you to do that. And it'll also make it harder for someone who's mentally ill. I'm going to yield back to my friend, the senator from West Virginia. But before I do that, I want to make just one simple point about how tangible and how real and how important this can be. To this I'm referring to enhancing compliance with the NICS background check system. We all remember the Virginia Tech shooting. And the tragedy here, one of the aspects of this tragedy is that the shooter's ability to obtain a weapon might have been prevented. I say that because the young man, Sung Hoi Chu, had already been adjudicated to be mentally ill, dangerously so, by a Virginia judge. They had discovered this. They had figured this out. They knew that this was a very unstable and very dangerous man. But the state of Virginia never passed that information on. And so there was no information about this man in the national background check system. When who knows whatever demons possessed him to go out and obtain guns so that he could wreak the havoc that he did, he went and submitted himself to a background check. And he passed with flying colors because the system didn't have the data. What Senator Manchin, one of the things that Senator Manchin and I are proposing in this legislation is let's provide greater incentives, and there's a carrot and there's a stick and a cost to states so that they will be more in compliance. Now, I'll be clear. If Virginia had provided this information to the system, then this shooter from Virginia Tech would have been denied that day, and we don't know what would have happened after that. It's possible that he would have found some other way to obtain weapons, but think of all the other things that might have happened if he had been denied at that moment and he had walked out of that store. Who knows what else might have intervened? Whether he would have gotten help, whether he would have been stopped some other way. We'll never know that. But it seems to me that it's a good idea to try to put that block in place. And that's one of the things that we would achieve, our legislation, I think, would go a long way over time to encouraging and, in fact, realizing a greater compliance on the part of the various states. And Senator Manchin may want to elaborate a little bit on how we achieve that, and then I would continue in this discussion with him.
Mr. President.
Yeah.
Mr. President, I come from a state like most of the rural states in America that there's an awful lot of people who just live a solid life. There's a thing back home that we call, you have either common sense, nonsense, now we think you ought to have a little gun sense. And it just makes sense to think about what we're doing here by not infringing on anybody's rights, but protecting those and prohibiting those who shouldn't be able to have a firearm through a commercial transaction. My good friend Senator Toomey was just talking about the Second Amendment rights, which all of us hold near and dear if you come from a gun culture state such as ours. With that being said, I just talked about common sense and gun sense. One of the largest pro-gun organizations in the country, one of the largest, the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, which is strictly for the right to protect the Second Amendment, have come out in total support of this legislation. Total support. Because you know why? They read the bill. And that's all we're asking. They read the bill. We've had a lot of our colleagues have been told certain things. We have a lot of friends in different gun organizations that have been told a different thing. And all we have asked, Senator Toomey and I, take time and read it. We started out working this bill from so many different angles. Everybody had a part of this. What we tried to do is find something that would make a difference. Now, I want you to think about this. Most every one of our colleagues have been visited by those unbelievable families from Newtown. I can't even imagine. I really can't. I still can't. And I know you've probably seen the clips when I kind of lost control of my emotions there. But I'm a grandfather. I'm a father. And I can only imagine what these families are going through. Now, let me put you in that state of mind. You lose a little child in such a tragic, and the child goes to school, and you would never expect that child not to come home from school. One of the safest, most sacred places we would have, but it happens. Now, how would you feel? What state of mind would you be in? And let me tell you where their states of mind. To a T. Each one of these Newtown families I met, they come in, they says, we don't want to take anybody's guns away. We don't want to ban any weapons. We don't want to infringe on your Second Amendment rights. And then on top of that, you know what they say? We really know and realize that the bill you're working on right now would not have saved my beautiful little child. But what we're asking you to do is maybe save another family, just maybe prevent another family from going through what we went through. Now think about that. I wish I could be that strong. I said if we in this body, if 100 of us had 1 ounce of the courage that those family members have, oh my goodness, what a body we'd have. If we weren't worried about all the outside pressure and maybe getting elected, maybe getting campaign funds that it would take for us to go out and get elected. If we worried about, basically, can we keep guns out of the hand in a commercial transaction from a criminal who's gone through a court system and found guilty, through a mentally insane person who's gone through a court and found to be unfit. Just maybe we could save 1 life. Someone says, well, why would you take this on? I don't know why else we were sent here, Mr. President, than to try to make a difference. You know, the easiest vote I can make while I'm a senator is no. I can make no and vote no on about everything and be fine. I can go home and people won't, why'd you do that? I'm glad you voted that way because I don't like that either. You follow me? No is the safest vote as a congressperson or a senator. I understand that. And it's wonderful, I guess, to have a title as a senator. This is a great honor to be in this unbelievable body with these truly magnificent people. I want to make a difference. I want to do something. And I think most of my colleagues. The only thing I'm asking my colleagues who have been told something, or they've heard something, or they've gotten pressured phone calls and letters, is to read the bill. Just read. It's only 49 pages. Mr. President, when have we had something that could change the course of our country, and it's only 49 pages long? I've seen bills that were 1,000 pages, 500 pages, amendments 300 pages. We've got an entire bill, 49 pages, sir. That's all we've asked for. That's all. We're going to be on the floor for quite some time, my dear friend, Senator Toomey. Tomorrow we'll probably be joined by our other good friends, Senator Kirk and Senator Schumer. Everybody's come together. Senator Schumer has a piece of bill that started that I says, my dear friend Chuck, I can't support that. He says, can I work with you? I says, I'd love for you to work with me. And he did that. And then Mark Kirk, my dear friend Mark Kirk from Illinois, who's just been steadfast, rock solid, has been right there. This is bipartisan. And it really, the bipartisan, I'm so bipartisan. Is it Democrat and Republican? This is American. I don't want to say it's bipartisan. This is American. This is about, can we make a difference? Can we change something? Can you have people that basically are the most unselfish, strongest, bravest people I've ever met, the families of the Newtown children, be able to come and say, listen, I want to protect the rights of law-abiding citizens. I want you to have your right. I want you to enjoy your gun. I want you to shoot it. I want you to enjoy your hunting trip with your family. I want you to enjoy all the things that the Second Amendment gives you. But I also want you, if you can, protect another family, protect another child, protect another person in America. That's all we're trying to do. And as you look through the bill, there's so many different things we've talked about. I've heard people say, oh my goodness, they're going to start registering. And you know what? They're going to give all of those records to some big fancy computer that's going to know exactly where to come and get your gun, Mr. President. Not only does the law prohibit that today, this bill, when we pass this bill, this law will basically say if any government agency intends to do that and abuse that record that the law-abiding firearm dealer is supposed to keep, and only them, it will not only be a felony, it's 15 years of imprisonment. That's why you might have these organizations that are basically joining in and now looking and reading the bill and say, my goodness, that's really protecting the Second Amendment rights. So it's an emotional bill. It's an emotional time in our country. But truly, it's a time for us to come together. It truly is. There's a healing that must go on, and this bill will help that healing. And we want to talk about this, and we're going to go into it detail by detail, step by step. And I just again thank my good friend, Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, and I'd like for him to go ahead and explain on that.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
I think it might be useful to just discuss a little bit some of the specific ways in which this legislation would enhance the compliance and the participation on the part of our 50 states with this existing background check system. Because as Senator Manchin, as we both said, we're not creating a new system. We're not creating a new set of rules by which the system operates. What we're simply asking is, since states already have information about people who are criminals and people who are dangerously mentally ill, we want them to put that in the database so that we can discover it when someone goes and attempts to buy a firearm. By the way,
let me just say also that I might mention, if I may,
West Virginia,
that we also talked and discussed about that to put an incentive so someone can't say that that's an unfunded mandate. That is not an unfunded mandate, my good friend.
And I also want to mention, you know, one of the very typical categories of mental illness that we want to capture are people who've been publicly adjudicated so, people who've pleaded not guilty to a crime by reason of insanity. That strikes me as a pretty good definition of somebody who's mentally ill, or someone who's deemed not competent to stand trial by virtue of their mental deficiency. That would be another category. But the idea here is we have a series of specific measures that would encourage greater compliance. There's a carrot and stick approach. We would authorize some funding. It would have to live within the spending caps that we've already agreed to, overall spending caps. But we authorize funding for grants that states can use to carry out, first of all, an assessment of the extent to which they are currently in compliance or not. As I say, some states are probably doing virtually all that they can. Other states are doing almost nothing in terms of providing this information that they have to this database system. And they can start with an assessment of that. We would then ask them to submit a 4-year plan by which they would develop full compliance, or as full as they can achieve in 4 years. They'd work this out with the Attorney General. There will be benchmarks along the way. And they would have a series of steps that they would take by which they would start to turn over this information that they already have about people who are criminals and people who are mentally ill. Now, if a state refuses to develop such a plan or to achieve the benchmarks that they set out in their own plan, then we would propose that they'd have a penalty and they would lose some funding. That's the mechanism by which we have an inducement, incentive for these states. They could lose up to 15% of what's known as the burn JAG funding. That is funding that Congress annually makes available to states for fighting crime. So I think this is a sensible combination of measures to simply encourage states to participate as they should. Now, if the gentleman from West Virginia had anything more to say about the NICS improvement piece of this, I will certainly yield. And if not, I want to mention a reason why I feel strongly about expanding the background checks. But, Mr. President, at this point, I'll yield back to the gentleman from West Virginia.
Senator from West Virginia.
I thank the good senator from Pennsylvania, and I appreciate that. I just think that what he said is spot on. What we're doing is basically just saying that it preserves important background checks, exemptions in current law, like the temporary transfers. That way, for example, you can loan your hunting rifle. A lot of people they're hearing all these misnomers. Is you can't even loan your hunting rifle to your friend or to your family member. You can do that. We're not prohibiting against that. Your buddy or whoever without restrictions. Also under current law, transfers between family, friends, and neighbors we've just talked about. That's all allowed to be done. So don't believe if someone's telling you that can't be done. That is not what we're talking about here. Again, it's just common sense. And like I say, the senator and our other colleagues, Senator Kirk and Senator Schumer, and we've been talking back and forth on this. And this is not a bill that we just set down as senators. We've had people from all different walks of life have input. And we would go and do a little research to find out if that made sense, if that's been done, if it had happened, if an infringement's been done, or if a person has not been able to enjoy their rights as an American citizen, a law-abiding citizen. We did all of that. And I just appreciate so much the senator pointing out some of those, and he'll continue, and I will be happy to come back later. So at this time, I would yield back to the senator from Pennsylvania.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
And Mr. President, the last point I would make about the improvement of the NICS system is something I should have mentioned, which is currently there are states which can adjudicate someone as mentally ill, for instance, but leave that person with very few options to challenge that status. That's a current situation. We remedy that. One of the things we require in this bill, this 4-year plan that we require the states to develop, has to include a program, a mechanism by which a person who feels they have been wrongly designated as someone who can't own a firearm by virtue of their criminal background or their mental health, they would have an opportunity to challenge that, as they should. There ought to be a process they can go through to challenge that finding so that nobody who doesn't belong on this list ends up on this list. Let me move on to the background checks at gun shows, but I'm going to introduce this by reading a letter that I received from a constituent just yesterday. This happens to be a woman whom I know very well. I've known her for years. She's a conservative Republican, as it happens. She's a Second Amendment owner. Let me just read to you what she wrote. She wrote, "Hello, Pat. I just had to write after watching your leadership with this very difficult issue. I very much understand what you're doing with the gun show checks and appreciate your dealing with this. This issue is very personal to me, and if you'll indulge me, I'll tell you why." She goes on to say, "I'm a very strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and I'm the gun owner in my house. I do shoot, and my father very proudly passed down his Remington 1100 to me several years before he passed away. He presented it to me with great pride, and I accepted it as a very special moment between us. Meanwhile, Pat, I have an adopted daughter who has had emotional troubles her entire life. Much of our journey with her has been difficult, and it continues to this day. My daughter has been involuntarily committed twice, and I unfortunately believe that it won't be the last time, as she refuses to get proper treatment. I was the one who had to sign her paperwork the first time, and it was made clear to me that I'd be taking away her right to own a gun. I knew that we had no choice but to try to get her some help. But my hand shook, and I had to pause quite a long time over that document because I so strongly believe in our Second Amendment rights. Nevertheless, I signed it, and I would do it again today. At various times, people have been concerned for our safety with the volatile nature of my daughter's problems. The idea that she would be able to purchase a weapon openly in a public venue is not acceptable. I don't believe that she actually would, but I don't find any comfort in the fact that she could have an avenue if she so chose. Once again, I can't emphasize the importance of the Second Amendment to me enough. Pat, I thank you for your efforts in D.C. and bless you for all that you're doing. Be well and be strong." I think that says a lot about what we're trying to accomplish here. Here we have a passionate supporter of the Second Amendment, a gun owner, someone who has always been a believer in the Second Amendment, and for reasons that she's explained, very personal, very important reasons, she doesn't want her daughter to be able to go into a gun show and buy a firearm without so much as a background check. Since the mom has authorized the recognition of her daughter's problems if the information is provided, and if that state complies, in this case it's my state of Pennsylvania, complies with this background check system, then someone in the circumstances of her daughter attempting to buy a weapon at a gun show would be denied. And I think that's the outcome that we all want. It's certainly the outcome that her own mother wants, who loves her dearly and loves the Second Amendment. And at this time, I'd be happy to yield back to the gentleman from West Virginia.
Senator from West Virginia.
Thank you, Senator. And I think we all have letters like Senator Toomey is receiving right now, and people looking for what we call gun sense, which goes right along with common sense. There's so much out there about the bill, and let me just reiterate a couple things the bill does not do. What the bill will not do. The bill will not in any way, shape, or form infringe upon anyone's Second Amendment rights to keep and bear arms. In fact, it strengthens that, as Senator Toomey has so eloquently described. The bill will not take away anyone's guns. Nobody will have their guns taken away. The bill will not ban any type of a firearm. It's not even in the bill. We're not banning anything. The bill will not ban or restrict the use of any kind of bullet or any size of clip. It's not in this legislation. The bill will not create a national registry, which we just spoke about. And in fact, it explicitly prohibits that, which we've given you the penalties of a felony and a 15-year sentence. And as we talk about this bill, we're asking our colleagues to come down and bring their questions, concerns, or what they believe and what they've seen in talking to their constituents. I'm right now very pleased to have with me a colleague of mine from the Big Sky state of Montana, who comes from gun culture, like myself and Senator Toomey. And if I could, I'd like to yield to the senator from Montana at this time.
Mr. President,
Senator from Montana.
I'd like to thank the senator from West Virginia. I'd like to thank the senator from Pennsylvania. And I'd like to rise and talk about the Toomey Manchin Amendment, knowing that this is not an end-all when it comes to violence in America. We have got to do some things that revolve around mental health, mental illness, how we treat that, how we move forward in ways that make sense for folks that believe strongly in the Second Amendment, but also believe in how we make our communities safer. So whether it's the Toomey Manchin Amendment or whether it's some other amendment that may come up during this debate, or whether it's an amendment that deals with mental health and how we treat it and how we get professionals out there on the ground, this is a very important issue for folks in this country. Second Amendment is very important. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, which most of you know. I come from a farming background. My grandparents came to our farm a little over 100 years ago. When my folks took the place over, my dad set up a custom butcher shop. For 20 years, my wife Charlotte and I ran that custom butcher shop. That means every morning, literally every morning, I would get up and we would go knock down a beef or a pork with a gun. I literally made a good portion of my living on the farm with a gun. It was a tool. It was a way that kept us on the farm. It was a way that kept our farm economically viable. But you don't have to be a butcher to know the value of a gun. In Montana, we've got sportsmen and women who literally start hunting at a very, very early age and know how to handle a gun. They know responsible gun ownership when they see it, and they know irresponsible gun ownership when they see that too. Mr. President, right now anybody can go out and buy a gun. In some states where the National Instant Crime Background Check isn't very good, literally anybody, whether they've got a criminal record or a history of violent mental illness, can go out and buy a gun. I think that what we're trying to do, what Senators Manchin and Toomey are trying to do with this amendment, is trying to make the Second Amendment stronger for the people who are law-abiding gun owners, but yet trying to keep guns out of the hands of folks who cannot handle them in a responsible way and have a record of that, a court-adjudicated record. So, you know, as we move forth here and we talk about the things that this bill does positively and negatively, I'm going to tell you, I've read it forwards and backwards. I've talked to folks, and I can tell you that this makes my Second Amendment rights stronger. And for that, I want to thank you. And here's how it does it. My Second Amendment rights are only put at risk by people who use them in an improper way, use guns in an improper way. This bipartisan agreement makes sure that we protect that Second Amendment by responsible gun owners. And not just in a willy-nilly way, by the way, responsible gun owners that are clearly defined. What irresponsible gun ownership is. It fixes the underlying bill that, quite frankly, I voted to move forward on, but without this amendment, I could not support. It does some positive things, like lets gun dealers sell firearms across state lines at gun shows. That's new. It improves the process by which someone can get their rights restored. This is a big one for me. We've got veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan that, and by the way, need treatment, can go get treatment. This bill does not impact them whatsoever. But on the other hand, if somebody has a serious problem, gets put on a list, they've got the ability through this law to be able to get off that list once they prove that they can handle that responsibly, that gun ownership. There's been a lot of talk about gun registries. I don't think this bill prohibits it from the Department of Justice. the way the world is right now, I think it's fair to say nothing changes. No gun registry now, no gun registry after this amendment is passed. In fact, strictly prohibits it when it comes to the Department of Justice. There are protections in here for veterans that make sure that veterans are treated fairly by the system. I serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee. Montana has the second per capita number of veterans in the country. And it's important that, especially, well, it was true with Vietnam, but especially with Iraq and Afghanistan, that these folks are able to get the treatment they need without impacting their Second Amendment rights. And I think we're clear on that. It does not impact them in a negative way. If you want to give a gun to your son or daughter, or you want to sell it to your neighbors or friends, there's no background check required. Active military can buy a gun in their home state or the station where they're at, not just their duty station. It allows for a concealed carry permit to be used in lieu of a background check. But the bottom line is it doesn't impact my Second Amendment rights whatsoever. I was on the tractor this weekend, seeding a few peas and a little bit of barley. On the radio came a show called Tradio, where if you've got something you want to sell, you put it up on the radio. And one of the things that was being sold was a 308 rifle. Under this bill, if I put a 308 rifle on the radio, and Patrick Toomey calls me up and says, hey, I want to buy that gun, I can. Patrick Toomey's a friend of mine. We can sell it, no background check. But if somebody that I don't know calls, then we whip down to the pick out of the local store, do a quick background check, which takes, I'll ask Senator Manchin from West Virginia. What does a background check typically take on an individual buy a gun?
Senator, I would say that more than 90% of the background checks in America that are done are less than 3 minutes and probably even no more than a minute and a half. So in that range there, that tells you about how quick it can be done.
Exactly. So you zip down to the local gun store, wherever it might be in your town, and do the background check, and then you don't have to worry about if, in fact, that person has a criminal past or is severely, violently mentally ill. It'll be there. And there's also language in this bill that if a state isn't putting information in the National Instant Criminal Background Check, money is pulled back. In the state of Montana, I believe it's about 10%. In the state of Montana, that's serious dollars. That's well over $100,000 we pulled back. Would the senator from West Virginia like to talk about the thinking that went into that and how this could impact the background?
We had all the members that worked on the bill, and Senator Toomey and Senator Kirk and Senator Schumer, all of us got together on that, and there had to be basically, and one of our largest gun organizations brought it to task saying, listen, we supported background checks 10 or more years ago. It just didn't work. You know what? They were right. So we said, fine. Do you throw the baby out with the bathwater, or do you change the water and make it a little bit better? So we went back and looked at it, and we said, fine. We didn't want any unfunded mandates, so we put $100 million a year for 4 years for the states to have grants to get them up and running the way they should be. So there's an incentive. We also said if you don't do your job and you don't turn your records over of your adjudicated criminals or mental, then 10% first year, 11%, I think it goes to 13 and up to 15. And that's off of your burn jag money, which is every state depends on that burn jag money. And that's serious. No one else has ever put that. And we know what? That concern came from the gun organizations right now, one of them who's not supporting it and should be.
Well, the bottom line is I think this puts into effect real incentives to keep this the National Instant Criminal Background Check database up to snuff. There's also a commission on mass violence in this bill that I think is good policy as we move forward, as we find almost on a daily basis some incident that's happened that's unacceptable. The bottom line here, and I know you guys have talked about this a lot during your presentation of the bill, you've talked about something called common sense. Making sure that when we do a background check, it actually is a background check. Making sure that, and by the way, this bill will not solve all the violence problems in this country, not even close. But is it a step in the right direction while protecting my Second Amendment rights? Yes, it is. Does it take away my guns? Does it stop my ability to go out and buy any guns that I could buy today? No, it does not. Does it have any impacts on things like assault rifles or big, large magazine clips? No, it does not. What it does is this. Once the National Instant Criminal Background Check database is up to snuff, it will prevent people who have a history of violence, who use guns improperly, from getting a gun. It will prevent people who are violently mentally ill from being able to go out there and buy a gun. And I can tell you that if we're able to work together in a bipartisan way, as the senator from West Virginia and the senator from Pennsylvania have done, hopefully we can move forth with some issues, some policies that deal with mental health in this country, an issue that we've never dealt with well as a society, or the stigma that is associated with it. If we can do that, there are other amendments out potentially that we can put onto this bill as we move forth. And if the amendments have common sense backing and protects the Second Amendment, we should take a hard look at them and have a debate on those too. But the bottom line is this: I want my Second Amendment rights protected. I want law-abiding citizens in this country to be able to go and continue to be able to purchase firearms. I want my kids to be able to do that. I want my grandkids to be able to do that. And I think this bill helps ensure that. I want to thank the sponsors for their hard work. I yield the floor to the senator from West Virginia.
Let me just say, on behalf of all of us who worked so hard, and I want to thank my good friend, Senator Tester from Montana. He comes from the same culture I come from, and I know how many calls he's received and how much pressure he's had. I know that because of all of the misconceptions, untruths. But he did something that we're asking all of our colleagues to do. He read the bill. He read the bill and found out for himself that this bill does exactly what we've been trying to do for a long time, and most importantly, protecting the innocent and our children by keeping the guns away from people that shouldn't have them and not infringing on anybody's rights. He read the bill. And that's all we've asked for. So at this time, I'd like to yield back to my dear friend from Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the senator from West Virginia makes a really, I know it may seem very basic, just read the bill. This bill has been available online since Thursday night. It's available now. It's available in every detail. It's available in summary form, any way people choose to look at it. The Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, one of the pro-Second Amendment groups that endorses this bill, did so, and I'm just going to read briefly from their quote. They said, if you read the Manchin-Toomey substitute amendment, you can see all the advances for our cause meaning defense of the Second Amendment, that it contains. Here's the bottom line. As the senator from Montana pointed out, our amendment isn't gun control. In my view, this is very clear, and I think it's an important contrast. There are other members of this body who are not happy with this bill because they want active, aggressive gun control. For instance, they want to ban various categories of weapons. They want to ban various kinds of ammunition. They'd like to have various kinds of waiting periods and other restrictions on law-abiding citizens. That's gun control. Restricting the freedom of law-abiding citizens who've never done anything to harm anyone, and restricting their Second Amendment rights, That's gun control. I disagree with it. I oppose it. I'll oppose every such amendment that comes before this body. But trying to keep guns out of the hands of people who aren't legally entitled to have them, dangerous people, be they criminals or dangerously mentally ill people, that's not gun control. That's common sense. As I started off my comments, there's no dispute that that's not an infringement on the Second Amendment. Our founders didn't think so. Our Supreme Court justices don't believe so. The laws in 50 states don't maintain that. It's just common sense. I want to point out another difference in the approach that Senator Manchin and I have taken versus that some others in this body have taken. Others have said, let's make a universal background check and then we'll think about who to make an exception for. And they carve out very narrow categories. Well, one of the problems with that, in my view, is you're not going to imagine every set of circumstances you ought to carve out. We took a different approach. We said, you know what? Private transactions generally don't need to be subject to this, but I'm not going to try to imagine every conceivable private transaction. And so instead, what we said was, let's have background checks on commercial transactions. That's where the big volume of transactions occur. That's where strangers are buying and selling guns from each other. And that's why we required the background check at gun shows, and we required the background checks on internet sales. But all the private transactions, whether they're within a family member or friends or neighbors or colleagues, all of that, if it doesn't happen at a gun show and it doesn't happen over the internet, it's not subject to the background check because we thought that that would be an unnecessary burden on people who know each other. Now let me just run through quickly some of the ways in which this legislation strengthens the ability of law-abiding citizens to exercise their Second Amendment rights. And I'll do this briefly. The senator from Montana touched on some of these. And I ought to start off underscoring something that the senator from West Virginia mentioned earlier. Not only will this not in any way contribute to any kind of national registry, it's explicitly forbidden. And anybody in the federal government who did try to create a federal registry would become a felon subject to 15 years imprisonment. So that's point number one. Some of the problems that we've heard from our constituents who are gun enthusiasts that we were able to address in this legislation, one is to clarify and fix interstate travel laws, because sportsmen who are traveling long distances, this happens, unfortunately, it happens too frequently. When a sportsman from one state is traveling to another state, maybe he's on a hunting trip, maybe he's going home for Christmas and he wants to give a relative a gun as a present, he's perfectly lawfully entitled to own that gun. He's following the rules and regulation of his state. He packs the gun appropriately in his vehicle. And then as he's traveling through another state, he discovers, oh, he's not in compliance with that other state. People have gotten themselves into trouble. Never done a thing to harm anybody, just traveling into a state that has a whole different regime and doesn't respect the regime of his state. We fix that by clarifying in the legislation that if you're transiting through a state and you're in compliance with the laws of your home state, you're okay. We permit interstate handgun sales from dealers. We provide, and this is really important, the senator from Montana mentioned this, a legal process for restoring veterans' Second Amendment rights. We've got a problem in this country right now for veterans. They come back from serving this country, risking their lives, often sustaining injuries, sustaining trauma, and they can go to the VA and have a social worker decide that, well, they're not really able to handle their personal financial matters. That alone puts them on the registry and disqualifies them from being able to own a firearm legally, to be able to purchase one. Now, I think that's outrageous, frankly. That's current law. That's happening today, every day, to veterans. We deal with that. What we say is we change that system. Under our legislation, that just couldn't happen. Before anybody at the VA could designate a veteran as somebody that can't own a firearm, first of all, they'd have to inform the veteran 30 days in advance and give that veteran an opportunity to challenge that status. That's only fair. We owe that to these men and women who've given so much to us. That's in our bill. We also have a policy today, the law of the land forbids an active duty military person from buying a gun in his home state. I don't know whose idea that was. It doesn't make any sense to me, but that's the law. Well, we repeal that in this bill so that a man or woman who's serving in uniform in this country can buy a firearm in their home state. We also allow a person who has a concealed carry permit to use that permit as the mechanism by which they're approved for a gun sale, and that just stands to reason. The concealed carry permit process is itself a very cumbersome and onerous process. In many places, it's very thorough, it's much more extensive, and if you've passed that, then you should be fine. We have that built into this as well. I just want to underscore this. These are the reasons why two of the leading pro-Second Amendment groups have endorsed this bill. It enhances the opportunity of law-abiding citizens to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Now, if you're a criminal, or if you are mentally unqualified to have a firearm, then you're not going to like this bill. But as I said at the beginning, I feel very strongly it's not gun control to try to keep guns out of the hands of people who are not qualified to have them. So I again want to thank the gentleman from West Virginia, my friend. I appreciate the hard work you've put into this. I have another meeting that I'm going to be heading to, but I appreciate the chance to share these thoughts and to work with you. And we will welcome any questions or comments or ideas or suggestions from our colleagues as we wrestle with this in the coming days and hopefully have a vote soon that'll be successful on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from West Virginia.
I'd like to, first of all, thank Senator Toomey for all his hard work in coming to be involved and informed as he has in bringing his expertise to this discussion that we've had with our colleagues. And I think as he's been talking, and we've been joined by our good friend, Senator Tester from Montana, and those of us who come from this gun culture state, that we can maybe put some of these myths to side, if you will, and allow the facts to come out. I think the most important thing from us talking today for a while has been that we're not creating new law. We're improving old law. And I think that's what we're sent here to do. My father always used to say, the only thing new in this world is a pair of eyes. Everything else has been pretty much improved upon by what someone else has done. That's what we're trying to do. We're improving on a system that needed to be improved. The veterans, we just talked about the veterans as Senator Toomey had just done. I didn't know to the extent of how veterans were treated when they come home. We're in a war that's longer than 12 years and counting. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of men and women who've put their lives on the line for us come back with challenges. If they've been affected by this war, they're almost afraid to go to get evaluated, because if they're evaluated in a positive way, they can be discriminated against. I believe that's wrong unless they're found through a process and a procedure to be not competent. We have 150,000 that maybe never were notified of their rights, which we're going to make sure that they have that appeal process available to them. And when this piece of legislation passes, every veteran coming back, as they go through that court proceeding, can say, wait a minute, I want an appeal process. I think your evaluation's wrong. So you just can't put them in a system that they have to work the rest of their life to undo. I think that we owe that to our veterans in this great country. Again, it comes down to simply just reading the bill and not making up things and listening to organizations who may be using this fear tactic as a campaign to raise funds and finances and money. I hate to say that. You know, I'm a proud member of organizations, and they do an awful lot of good in informing, and we teach safety to young children. We do a lot of things. I had the benefit of growing up in a town that the people in that town had a sportsman's club called the Farmington Sportsman Club. My father was not a big sportsman, but my father wanted me to be involved. He worked a lot and didn't have time. So these people took me under their wing at a very young age and taught me to respect and to be able to use firearms safe and be responsible, totally responsible for that. when I should put a shell in the gun, when I should not have a shell, when I should have it in my case, how I should carry it in the woods, how when I crossed a fence, the gun should be unloaded, because that's when we've heard of some horrific acts, just little things. They ingrain that into me, and we do that, and these organizations do a lot of good. But when they put misinformation out, that is a disservice to the law-abiding gun owners and the people who respect the rights and that Second Amendment gives us, which Senator Toomey has so eloquently gone into, and Senator Tester has spoken to also. This is going to continue for some time, I'm understanding, and we're going to be talking, Senator Toomey and I will be talking on this, and we'll be joined by, I'm sure, our other colleagues, Senator Kirk, Senator Schumer, and Senator Tester. We're inviting all of our colleagues to come down. If you've heard something from a constituent or from an organization, come down and talk to us about it, and we'll show you in the bill that it doesn't do what they've said. You know, the biggest thing that we have is the registration. Doesn't do that. Not only does it not do it, it even protects you more than what you're protected today by law. We improve upon it. It doesn't take anybody's guns away. I think Senator Toomey had talked about, basically, there's things that he wouldn't vote for, nor would I. But guess what? That's not in this bill. There'll be other bills, other amendments, that all the colleagues will have a chance to either support, if they're for more gun support, or oppose. What we're saying is, this is one piece of legislation we know will make a difference by keeping guns out of the hands of those who have been adjudicated through a mental court or a court system or criminal. And we know that through commercial transactions, and people have used all different types of figures, how many guns basically are transferred at a gun show or online. And we know with the expansion of internet, there's going to be more and more. And all we're saying is that's the least personal of all the transactions on an internet. And we're going to make sure that, I might not know you, Mr. President, but up in your beautiful state of Maine, and I see something you have that I would like, I have the technology of the modern world today to make contact and hopefully be able to purchase that, which I never had 20, 30, 40 years ago. But I'm going to make sure also that that gun is sent to a licensed dealer who depends on their livelihood by doing and abiding by the law to make sure that a background check's done on me before I can purchase or pick up that gun I bought from you. That only makes common sense. I've heard a lot of things, too, about saying, well, they could be charging. There's a lot of fees could be involved. We allow the person who's going to be doing that service for you to charge a fee. Let me tell you as a business person, this is what, as a business person, every one of us in business, especially retail, we know exactly what the value of every customer walks through a door. You might say, well, they're just shopping. Again, my father and grandfather says, there's no such thing as a shopper. They're all buyers. They just don't know it yet. They're going to buy something. Now, they walk through that store, they have a value. And if they have a value, do you know what's going to happen? You're going to see people advertising, please come and let us do your background check free for you. That's a service we want to give you. We want you to be right and make sure that the right person gets it. And guess what? They might be buying something else. They might buy new boots, some camouflage gear, might buy their son or their daughter a new outfit. You just can't believe. That's marketing. That's business. That's what it's all about. So don't let the naysayers say, oh, no, too much of a burden. Trust me. The markets have a unique ability to correct themselves and take advantage of it. And a customer, and as a buyer, not a shopper, you get those buyers coming through the door, we're going to sell them something. I know that. So we're going to be happy to talk about this bill for a few days here. We want to make sure that we invite all of our colleagues down. As we do, we'll be announcing the times we'll be coming to the floor. In the meantime, to all of my colleagues, to all of you out there that have been hearing all of the things and getting you excited that they're going to do something and take your guns away or take your rights away or register them, that is false. That is a bold-faced falsehood. And all we're saying is go online and read the bill. It's only 49 pages, and we even broke it down for you. If you will do that, and if our colleagues will do that and bring it to the floor, it's all we can ask for. The facts will set you free. The facts will set you free, Mr. President. And we believe we've worked hard. Our staffs have worked exceedingly hard. And I appreciate everybody and appreciate my good friend, Senator Toomey, my good friend, Senator Tester, the other senators that we have, Senator Mark Kirk from Illinois and Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, for working so hard to try to find a balance. And it takes us all, from the right and the left, from both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat and Independent, all of us to work together to make this country. This is an American bill. It's not a bipartisan. It's for our country. It's to save the children. It's to keep our society safe and also protect the rights of law-abiding citizens and law-abiding gun owners like myself and you, Mr. President. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.